but I wasn't happy inside. And I literally just got up one day and I quit. I was done with it. Men don't know what it's like to be a man these days. Am I being too masculine? Am I not being masculine enough? So I really talk about and really teach the principles of becoming a mindful alpha male.
This is the Coaches Council, made up of 6 elite coaches dedicated to serving and ending personal struggle for high performers in business, health, and relationships. As a collective, we have built and helped build 6, 7, and 8-figure businesses, dominate in multiple industries, coached and played in professional sports leagues, and developed some of the strongest and most intimate relationships, both professional and personal. This isn't your average podcast. It's for the hungry, the dedicated, the doers, for those that have a dream and truly want that dream to become reality. People who want to take action, leave their ego at the door, and own every level of their life. If that's you, then step into the Coaches Council as we rewrite the truths to living that high-performance life.
Welcome back to another week of the Coaches Council. We have a special week this week, and it's Meet the Coach. And we're starting off with Purdeep Sangha. And Purdeep, thank you so much for coming on today.
Hey, man. I guess I'm the lucky one. I'm the first one out of the group, isn't it?
Hey, you know what? It's hey, somebody always has to be the first guy.
Yeah, the guinea pig. I don't mind.
So, Purdeep, as we've kind of built this relationship and as we've continued to develop the Coaches Council, it's always been a pleasure talking with you. It's very rare that you meet people in this world and in this space that you connect with on such a deep level in such a short period of time. And that's something that I feel you and I have been able to do. And I really value and cherish that. And your story is so unique and your story is so powerful from understanding where you came from and what really pushes you and pulls you as your why and what your purpose is. And I'd love to just have you share that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So where do I start, man? I can start right at the beginning. So basically, I grew up in a small town, Kelowna, British Columbia. Justin, you know what I'm talking about because you're born in. Were you born in Canada? Or were you born in the U.S.?
No, I was born in Canada. I was born in Edmonton. So about 6 hours, 8 hours, I guess, east of you there in Kelowna. But that is the definition of God's country.
Yeah. Kelowna is an awesome. I kind of feel bad for you growing up in Edmonton. It's a nice place, but it gets cold, doesn't it?
Oh my God! I can't tell you how many times in the winter we would see -40 on the temperature gauge.
I remember I've been to Edmonton a number of times in Calgary, and going there in the winter, it's like your snot literally just freezes as you're breathing. It's hilarious.
Snotsicles, they have a name.
But I grew up in a small town. My parents were immigrants from India. My parents immigrated over in the early 70s. They, you can say they were probably the hardest working people I know, Justin. They literally worked their butts off because they came here with little skill. And they basically raised my brother and I to have a really good life, a half-decent life. So I grew up on an orchard. So my parents, what they did was they actually worked in an orchard when they came here. And my brother and I would be in an apple bin sometimes as my parents would be working. So we had a really different environment. You can say I literally grew up spending some days just by myself in the orchard, 8 to 10, 12 hours a day, just with trees and nature and seeing the blossoms bloom. So I kind of grew up. I kind of feel like it was a lucky childhood. My wife laughs because she's like, that was kind of slave labor because I was 9 years old when I first started working. But it taught me a lot of different things. And then my parents said, you know what, you get an education. We don't want you to be working hard in the orchard. So the 3 chosen paths for an immigrant family from India were either a doctor, lawyer, or an engineer. Those were the 3 things. So I started off actually in the sciences. I was actually in biochem in university. And my plan was to be a doctor, but it just wasn't for me. I can't see blood. I can't see people physically hurting. It's just not my thing. And so I switched over into business, and I spent, you can say, the rest of my career in business. I was in the corporate world for 14 years. I I rose to the ranks in terms of becoming an executive, and I was very successful. My goal was to be a CEO of a major corporation. And so I had this plan, and I worked my butt off to excel in this plan. I led pretty much every major division, from marketing to sales to operations to project management. So many different areas, basically because I wanted to get a full breadth and scope of a large corporation. How do you really grow a big business? But then it kind of came to a halt because I was miserable, man. I was absolutely miserable. My wife and I were actually, and I hear so many people talk about similar story, because I see so many executives in the same boat now, where my wife and I were having serious challenges. We were on the verge of divorce. I was not the man that I wanted to be. I was not happy by any means. I was kind of going in and living the motions. I was making the money. I was traveling. I had an expense account. We had box tickets to private events here at the arena, so we could do that. We would go see the Maple Leafs all the time, the Toronto Raptors, and entertain friends and all that kind of fun stuff. But I wasn't happy inside, and I literally just got up one day and I quit. I was done with it, and my wife was like, "Are you serious? You're going to do this?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to do this." And I think at first she thought I was joking, but then she's like, "I see this in your eyes. You are going to do this, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." So then I walked into work and I said, it's about time I move on. And some of the people at work were questioning the decision. They're like, "What happened? Did you get hurt? Did you fall? Did you hit your head?" Like, seriously, all of these scenarios came out. And even my parents said to me, they're like, "What are you doing? You're just throwing away the last 14 years of your life. Like, you were this close to hitting your goal," because my goal was to be a CEO of a major corporation at 40. That was my goal. And I was well known in the industry. I was just kind of known as a mover and shaker, but it just wasn't for me. And I wanted to do something more. And this is why we talk about meaning so much at the Coaches Council, and having a bigger vision and a bigger purpose. Is I was always one to seek meaning in my life. I was always one to figure out, okay, why am I put here on earth? And it just so happens that one of my passions is helping people. I was a tutor in high school. I was a personal trainer at 17, and I just continued that you can say path. I was managing people at the age of 16, and that was my passion throughout my life. And as I was an executive, I was also coaching other people on the side. I was coaching other executives. I was coaching coaching entrepreneurs. And I soon realized that there's a lot of people out there that are in business that just don't have the skills, and they were never taught the skills, whether through the academic path or other training, to really grow businesses effectively. And so what came natural to me was actually really it wasn't natural to them. So I soon figured out that there was a niche out there, and so I said, I'm going to do this full time. I jumped into it full force, and my goal was to really focus on the business side. You can say the business strategies and tactics, because I want to be known as a business guy. I was coaching both men and women at that time, which was how I started off. But then I kept getting nudged into this other corner, and I kept getting these doors kept opening up, and it was working specifically with men. And I wasn't in that realm. I didn't want to really focus specifically on men, but then I realized that I had this natural connection, and I was able to bring things out of men. I was able to talk to men about certain aspects of life, about relationships, about their drive. And this all honestly stems from my father, because my father was a very powerful man. He was an ex-police officer as well. And he, when he came into a room, he had like total presence. Like, you knew he was in the room. He was 6'1", he was 240 pounds. Plus he had this turban on that people would call the satellite, because it was so big. And so he was this tall dude, right? And this big guy. And so when he walked in, he was just total presence. But he was a super softie as well. Like, he was just one of the most loving people I know. So I got to see both sides of him. But the challenge I saw with my dad, who was also a business owner, was he suffered from alcoholism. And it was not pretty at times, because when you have a 6'1" guy that's drinking past his limits, and he had his own crap to deal with when he was younger, sometimes he would become, you can say, not the nicest person in life. And I never take that away from him, because I knew outside of drinking alcohol, he was an awesome dad. And so I saw this polar side to him, which was really interesting. But it drove me to figure out what the male psyche is about. why do men do certain things? And that led into relationships, and that led into so many different aspects. But I saw my dad challenged on paper. He had it all, right? He had a loving, beautiful wife. He had 2 young kids. We were always good kids. He had a business, traveled, never had any of those, you could say, major challenges in life, but he was never fulfilled. And so that led me into this path that I'm in right now, which is helping men specifically. So, if you're watching this, you see the shirt, Men Who Win. That's really the movement that we're creating, because right now at this particular time, Justin, I know it's a long-winded story, but you know this better than a lot of people, is men are in a really tough spot right now because men are taught to be a certain way. Men don't know what it's like to be a man these days. Am I being too masculine? And am I not being masculine enough? What's this whole thing about emotions? And then you have crappy leadership. Like, I'm not going to mention any one political person in general that are giving men a bad rap, but we are just not, I'm going to say, made like we were used to, not like the older generation where we lived off of integrity, values, right? Honesty, all of these kinds of things that a true leader is about. So I really talk about and really teach the principles of becoming a mindful alpha male, which is being in control of your life from the standpoint of being able to create it. You can never be in control of your situations, but you can be in control of yourself and how you respond to those situations. So you can actually maneuver effectively. But then there's also the mindfulness aspect. And if I could equate it to anything, it'd be like, Rambo on one side and then the Dalai Lama on the other side. And so it's a blend in terms of trying to take the best of both worlds and integrate that into the lives that we live today. Because we as men need to be strong leaders for our family. We need to be strong leaders for our children. We need to be strong leaders for our community, for the workplace, especially in business. But I see such a lack of that, especially right now when we see COVID. I'm wondering, like, where are the men that are standing up to help other people in society, to stand up against all of this negativity that people are spreading, to stand up and say, guys, we got this, right? We can get through this. We just got to band together on this aspect. So in a nutshell, what I basically do right now is help men in 2 aspects. I help men in business. So I help them from a business strategy standpoint and the tactics to really grow and scale their business. But then I also help them on the other side, which is you can say the neuroscience behind mindset, the emotional intelligence component, high performance, all of these kinds of things, as well as to a certain degree spirituality that we bring into this as well. So it's really helping men live a more fulfilling life and really get what they want out of it. That's a long spiel there, isn't it?
That you know what? I hit mute and unmute a couple times. I was like, okay, this is great. And no, let him go. Yeah. He's on a roll. But no, it's such a powerful story though, Purdeep, because it's so true. And being a male, I can pull from my story on that on so many levels. And it's so relatable. I don't know if there's any male out there that can say honestly that nothing that you said resonates with them, because it is such it's something as a human species we all have in common. And it's such a powerful movement that you're driving, and even that we're driving with Coaches Council on a higher level with a larger group of like-minded, you call it, you had it such a great name for it in mindful alpha males. And we're here for the betterment of those people to learn from. Now, I'm curious, what is it that you see as being the biggest downfall in the male gender when it comes to being able to have those empowering relationships, being able to have a thriving business or have a thriving career, but find that balance in everything? What is that one downfall that that you continue to see a lot?
Wow, that's a really, I would say, a loaded question, because I don't know if I see any one particular downfall, but I can tell you the few things. The first one is a lack of role models. Right now, we have a shortage of role models and mentors out there for men to really help and say, okay, these are the things that you should be living by. These are the values and integrity And honor, like these types of words that I'm using right now, honor, who uses these words right now? Very few people, right? So integrity, authenticity, honor, all the values, these are all the things that we should be focused on. So a lack of role models is one. And the other piece is, you know what, there's so much, and I'm not going to blame technology, because we have so much social media out there. We have so much media in general out there that are bashing men, that are telling men that, you know what, you need to be a certain way, you need to be softer, which I agree with. I don't agree that men necessarily need to be softer. They just need to be more empathetic and in tune with their emotions. And so there's a lot of confusion in terms of what it means to be a man. But now that I think about what the question that you're asking, the biggest thing I think that is a downfall for men is trying to do it alone and not asking for help. That is probably the most common thing that I see amongst high-performing men especially, that no one wants to admit that they're feeling challenged. No one wants to admit that their relationship isn't going well or that their business isn't going well. Like we're seeing it right now. There's a lot of people that had this persona of having an awesome business that are struggling. They're not able to even pay their bills and their mortgage. But you would never know that if you were to talk to them before this. So asking for help, I think, is the most important thing there.
We'd be remiss if we didn't take this time to thank our sponsors that allow us to reach you each and every week. The Coaches Council is powered by Canai Brands, a lab-tested, all-natural, pure hemp CBD company without the presence of THC. They encompass our passion for health, wellness, and fitness that we have on the Coaches Council. Visit canaibrands.com and at checkout, use the promo code COACHES20 to enhance your wellness journey. Why do you think asking for help is so hard for men? And what is it causing them to do? And as I ask that question, you get this big smile on your face, because I know you know the answer, or you have, and I know the biggest thing is it always comes back to individuals, right? There's certain reasons that certain people are going to have either certain answers to this question, but why is it that we try to do it ourselves?
Well, again, that's a loaded question. And here's just my perspective of it. There's a number of things. There's a natural tendency as men to try to do it alone, right? That's how our brains are wired, is to actually go out there and do the task. And there's a status component. If I ask for help, that reduces my status. That's the perception that we get as males. And so to do it alone is to be raising your status. Because once you hit that, not only do you have higher confidence, but you can tell the other person, hey, look, I didn't need any help. I did it by myself. And that's a symptom of the ego, right? We can talk about this even more. Individualism, for example, the differences between Eastern and Western culture, where especially in Western culture, we're very much about individualism, where Eastern culture is very much about doing things together, for example. Like in certain cultures, in Japan, for example, if you ask someone to take credit for something, they hesitate because no one individual wants to take credit. They want to give credit to the entire team. So that is the difference. Culture is really promoting individualism. And I think a lot of it has to do with how we are raised in families. And again, that I think over the last 2 decades, 3 decades, and probably even longer, families have gone through a real transition in terms of how they raise children. And that's why the divorce rates have gone up to such a high degree, and the reason why we're here right now. But in all honesty, it's a combination of societal pressures plus our natural tendency plus ego to really ask for help.
I want to dive into that a little bit. What is it that we can do culturally because obviously culture it's a very loaded term as well. We talk about culture in a family, we talk about culture in a business, we talk about culture in a city, we talk about culture in a region, and then we can talk about culture nationally. But just like where people are like, oh, my vote doesn't count, or some type of opinion like that, what is it that we can do as men, as women, as the human race? What is it that we can do in our family, in our business, in our city, in our region, in our country to help change that culture?
Yeah, I think, well, now that again, a really big question. The first thing is it starts at home. It starts in terms of how we act and react in our family situation. So how we raise our children. And I had this really interesting conversation with this gentleman the other day that talked about all the work that he's doing, and he's doing phenomenal stuff. But the one thing that I did miss is, he had all these goals and aspirations, but my whole thought pattern as he was talking was, what's your impact on your children going to be? Because that should be your biggest focus. My biggest focus right now, outside of helping men, is really my children. I want my children to grow up and be the best people from the perspective of contributing to society, learning how to live with enjoyment and fulfillment. That's my number one duty. And I think a lot of us men forget that. We get so tied up in trying to keep up with the Joneses, or we gotta support our families and make X amount of money, or we have to have a certain status, or we have to look a certain way. And we forget about what our core purpose is and what our core meaning is. And we are people first, we are human beings first, but then our next level as men is we are husbands and we are fathers. So we have to take that into accountability before we are CEOs, before we're executives, before we're entrepreneurs. So taking that is one aspect. The other one is really having open conversations, because I see, and again, I don't jump into the political realm, but when we see crappy leadership out there from other men, we have to have a conversation about it. And an open conversation without being offended, without talking about our political views, and say, is this person a great leader? If not, how do we have a conversation about this as men and say, okay, do we talk about the challenges with this leader? Do we figure out if there's a better leader to take the place? Like this is a big topic right now, because we do have really poor role models. And I think that's a big piece. We have to be able to challenge other men without getting offended, without getting violent, and without saying, without taking it personally and saying, that person's trying to attack me. We have to be open to that.
You talked so much about, as one of the biggest challenges for men, as being ego as well. And you all know those books. I mean, John Gordon's got a bunch of them. There's a bunch of leadership books. Everything starts with ego is the enemy. And ego will be the downfall of any type of leadership. Ego will be the downfall of any business, any home, any country. And what is it that you see as almost not an end-all be-all cure, but the first step for people being able to drop that ego and be more willing to hear feedback, be more willing to step up to the plate and take a hard look inside? And I ask that because of a couple of different reasons. One is we all know that anytime we're trying to accomplish something, the biggest thing we say is you just have to take the first step. And we can't focus on something I always say is you can't focus on outcomes. Outcomes are garbage. Focusing on winning is garbage. Focusing on losing 30 pounds is garbage. It's what habits or what process is going to get me to that goal, and focusing on those individual things. And what does it take for an individual to step back, understand that ego is there? Just accepting the fact that we know it's there is, I think, if you would agree, the first step, and just acknowledge that it's real. But then once we know it's real, what can we do to push beyond it?
Well, here's my perspective of ego, because there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of books. And I think this is where there's a balance between ego, having an ego and not having an ego. Every single person has an ego. If we take a look at it from a spirituality perspective, if the ego did not exist, we would not be here as individuals. We would just be one single form of energy and a blob, basically one big blob of energy and matter. But we're not. We're individuals here in the reality that we live in. So I have a different take, because I believe that the ego is necessary. It's necessary. If you take a look at it, for example, at athletes, the very top athletes have an ego, and they need to have an ego because they are the top athletes. The biggest thing to understand with ego is once you have that awareness and understanding of the separation between ego and me as a soul, as a spiritual being, is when to use that ego. And that is the biggest thing, because there's times when you can use the ego to your advantage. Example, sports, right? Any competitive piece. And sometimes to even motivate yourself, ego is there, right? If you're working out in the gym, sometimes you gotta motivate yourself a little bit, because you might look over at the other guy and say, I'm gonna lift a little bit more than that guy, or whatever it is. But then also to know when it's actually stopping you from self-reflection. That's the biggest downfall of ego, is a lot of times it blocks the self-reflection part. So if we get into an argument with our spouse, for example, one of the things that the ego will do is say, okay, I'm in the right, you're in the wrong. And dropping that and saying, it's not about right or wrong. Is this, this is one thing I'm very adamant about. I don't talk about right or wrong or good or bad. It's not necessarily that in life, because that's part of the world. It's really, is it empowering or disempowering you? So is it helping you live a more fulfilling life? Is it allowing you to get your goal faster? Is it allowing you to better someone else's life? If your ego is doing that, then you can perpetuate that. But if it's not, if it's stopping you from doing that, then it's time to pull back, right? If it's separating you from relationship, it's separating you from learning. If it's causing other people harm, or it's causing you harm or grief, then it's time to step back. But the biggest thing is to understand the balance. You talked about awareness, that's important, stepping back, but then also saying, where is it appropriate to have an ego and where is it not?
That's so important to, I think, understand, and you hit it, or you explained it so well, is that ego is necessary. Ego is necessary to accomplish anything, but it's that balance. It's that fine line of taking you to your goal, to pushing you over the edge, and then starting to hinder you in the other facets and aspects of your life.
Yeah.
So for everybody listening, where a lot of this has really resonated or something has really hit home, what would you say, or what would you recommend as being that first step for somebody to take?
Oh, wow. When it comes to anything, and this is always my first step with a lot of things in terms of, you can say, transformation, forwarding your life, bettering yourself or your relationships, is really taking a look at the emotional state. And so I like to take a look at the science behind things as well as the spirituality behind things. But one thing that it all really comes down to is emotions, right? Our state of emotions, the types of emotions that we live, our emotional awareness. Yeah, some people call it emotional intelligence, emotional mastery. But the biggest thing is to figure out, okay, what are we feeling right now? Because our feelings will show us. Our feelings are basically the projection of our actions. So if we are feeling a certain way, we are going to react a certain way, right? And so even beyond our thoughts, we have to pay attention to our emotions, because again, we have so many thoughts running through our minds that it's tough to take a hold of them. There's 60 to 80,000 plus thoughts a day that we have. Our emotions, though, are not as complicated. They are in a way, but there's not 60,000, 80 different thousand thoughts or emotions that you have every single day. So you can actually keep track of that. So I highly recommend saying, how am I feeling right now? It's a simple exercise. How am I feeling at this particular time? Write it down. You can journal it, see what the patterns are, because you can see the consistent patterns that you have in your emotions, and that will tell you what you need to change. I'll give you an example. If you're sitting with your family and you're constantly feeling a certain emotion that you don't want to feel, then you need to take a look and say, okay, is it my internal state? Is it my environment? Is someone saying something to me? What is it that's causing me to feel this way? And what can I change and what can I shift? Because we have the ability to change something. We just need to figure out what it is. Is it internal? Is it the environment? Do I have to remove myself? So for me, Justin, it really comes down to emotions. Because if you can manage your emotions better, you can pretty much do everything else.
Purdeep, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Every time I listen to you speak or we get on with the council, I learn something new every time. So for everybody out there, that's Purdeep Sangha. He helps men win and ultimately become the mindful alpha male. So Purdeep, it's a pleasure to have you on the Coaches Council, and to hear more from Purdeep and the rest of the council, be sure to tune in every Monday. New podcast is released on Google, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast fix. I think there's about 50 of them now. They keep on rolling out. But be sure to check in every Monday from the Coaches Council so we can help you get out of struggling times and give you strategies in which you can begin to own your life. So with that, stay hungry, stay humble, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for joining us for another week of the Coaches Council. If it wasn't for you viewers and listeners, we wouldn't have a platform. So again, it's all about you guys. And we want to give you a reward just for listening. We want to give you access to each one of our coaches for a little bit deeper, intimate experience. So if you go to coaches-council.com, coaches-council.com, subscribe and like to whatever platform you're viewing on, you're going to be entered to have that one-on-one experience. So be sure to go coaches-council.com and really interact with us, because we would love to interact with you. Until then, stay safe, stay hungry, stay humble, and thanks for listening.